He asked me every single day, "Have you signed out yet?" The excitement in his voice, the barely hidden smirk on his face, like he had already won, like I was already gone. And for a moment, he almost was right. But here's the thing about underestimating someone who has absolutely nothing to lose and every reason to stay. That morning, I looked him dead in the eyes, smiled, and said 3 words that wiped that smirk right off his face forever. This is the story of the quietest, pettiest, most satisfying revenge I have ever pulled off. And I did it with a smile. If you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, or pushed around by someone who thought they had all the power, this one's for you. Hit that like button, subscribe if you're new, and buckle up. Because today's story proves that sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't loud. It isn't dramatic. Sometimes it's just 2 words and a smile, and watching someone's whole world crumble in real time. You're in the military. You've worked hard to earn your place. You show up every day, you do your job, you keep your head down and your chin up, because that's what you do. That's what the uniform demands. Now imagine being placed into a tight-knit unit. 10 people, 1 room, 5 days a week, every single week. You eat together, work together, breathe the same recycled air, and fall asleep to the sounds of each other's exhaustion. It is intense, it is claustrophobic, and it is unavoidable. Our narrator, let's call her Sarah, didn't ask for this assignment. This particular group wasn't her first choice. The work wasn't what she had envisioned when she signed up. But military life doesn't exactly hand you a menu and ask for your preferences. You go where you're told. You adapt. You survive. And Sarah was fully prepared to do exactly that. There was just one problem. His name doesn't matter. We'll call him Marcus, because every story like this has a Marcus. You know the type. Loud when he doesn't need to be. Confident in all the wrong ways. The kind of guy who walks into a room and immediately starts calculating who he can push around. And the moment Sarah walked in, Marcus had already made up his mind. Now, here's what makes this particularly infuriating and what will make the ending that much more satisfying. Sarah hadn't done anything. Not a single thing. She hadn't embarrassed him, hadn't outperformed him in some humiliating way, hadn't even had a real conversation with the man. They had been working together for exactly 1 week. 1 week. And in that 1 week, Marcus had already decided that Sarah didn't belong, that she wasn't good enough, that she was a problem that needed to be removed. He criticized her work, constantly. Little digs, muttered under his breath, or said just loud enough for others to hear. That's not how you do it. She's going to slow us down. Accusations wrapped in fake concern. The kind of behavior that's hard to call out directly because nothing is ever said quite loud enough to be undeniable, but loud enough to poison the room. And every single time Sarah interacted with him, she was polite, calm, professional. She smiled when she didn't want to. She kept her voice level when her jaw was tight with frustration. She bit her tongue so hard she could taste blood, because she understood something important. In environments like this, the person who loses their composure first is the person who loses. Period. But here's what Sarah also understood, even if she hadn't put it into words yet. Marcus wasn't just being difficult. There was something else driving his hostility. Something older and uglier than a bad first impression or a personality clash. Sarah was the only woman in that group of 10. The only one. And in military spaces, spaces built on hierarchy and tradition and a certain kind of unspoken brotherhood, that matters. It creates an invisible line. An unspoken question that hangs in the air every time a woman walks through the door. Does she belong here? Marcus had already answered that question for himself. And his answer was no. Now, Sarah had been thinking about leaving the group. Genuinely. The assignment wasn't what she wanted, and the idea of spending 2 months in a room with someone who seemed determined to make her life miserable was, understandably, exhausting. She had started quietly looking into the process of switching groups, exploring options. Nothing was decided yet. It was still just a thought. But she made the mistake, or maybe it was fate, of mentioning it out loud. She said, casually, to no one in particular, "I'll probably look into switching groups." And Marcus lit up like Christmas morning. That's not an exaggeration. The shift in his energy was immediate and visible. His whole posture changed. His shoulders relaxed. The permanent scowl on his face cracked into something close to a grin. And he started asking, "Have you put in the request yet?" The next morning, "Did you talk to someone about switching?" That afternoon. "So, are you out?" Day after day. Multiple times a day. Like a kid who had asked Santa for one specific gift and couldn't stop thinking about whether it was under the tree. And every time he asked, Sarah would give a non-committal answer. Still figuring it out. Maybe. We'll see. But something was shifting inside her. She noticed the way his face fell, just slightly, when she didn't confirm she was leaving. She noticed the urgency in his questions, the barely concealed desperation, and she began to understand something that changed everything. He needed her to leave. Not because she was actually bad at the job, not because she was causing real problems, but because her presence, her simply being there, was a challenge to the version of the world he had built inside his head. A world where someone like Sarah didn't belong in a room like that. And the fact that she was still there, still doing her job, still smiling at him every morning, even as he treated her like dirt, it was eating him alive. That's when the thought crept in. Quiet at first, almost like a joke. What if I just stayed? Not because the assignment had suddenly become her dream posting, not because she had fallen in love with the work or magically resolved every concern she had, but because the most powerful thing she could do, in that moment, in that room, with that man, was refuse to give him what he wanted. He wanted her out. So she was going to stay. She sat with that thought overnight, turned it over, examined it from every angle, and by the next morning, it wasn't just a thought anymore. It was a decision. The morning arrived, ordinary in every way. Cold floor, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the smell of coffee and boot polish, the low hum of 10 people starting their day in a space that was too small for all of them. Marcus, right on schedule, approached. Same posture, same barely masked eagerness, same question he had been asking every single day since she first mentioned leaving. "So, have you signed out yet?" Sarah looked up from what she was doing. She held eye contact for just a moment longer than comfortable. And then, slowly, deliberately, with the calmest, most unbothered smile she had ever assembled in her life, she said, "Actually, I'm staying." 4 words. 4 words, and she watched his face do something extraordinary. The eagerness drained out of it first, then the color, then the casual arrogance he wore like a second uniform. His jaw didn't drop dramatically. This wasn't a movie. But his expression, that particular cocktail of shock and disappointment and something that looked an awful lot like panic, was more satisfying than any dramatic reaction could have ever been. Because it was real. He had been so sure, so certain. He had already started rewriting the story in his head, the one where Sarah left, and he had successfully pushed out the woman who didn't belong, and everything went back to the way he wanted it to be. And in 4 words, Sarah had taken that story away from him. She turned back to her work. She didn't gloat, didn't twist the knife, didn't need to. The smile said everything. Here's what I love about this story. Sarah didn't need a grand gesture. She didn't need to expose him, outrank him, or out-argue him. She just needed to stay. Sometimes, the most radical act of defiance is simply refusing to disappear when someone desperately wants you to. Presence, it turns out, can be the sharpest weapon of all. If this story gave you chills, or maybe a big, slow smile, smash that like button and drop a comment below. What's the most satisfying petty revenge you've ever pulled off or witnessed? I want to hear every glorious detail. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now, because we've got a whole library of stories exactly like this one. And trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Stay petty, stay winning. See you in the next one.